Hi, everyone. My name is Camela Logan, and I'm a UX researcher at Facebook. In my role, I study how culture shapes people's experiences with our products. Studying cultures is my jam. Prior to working at Facebook, I worked as a UX research consultant, wherein I conducted research for a wide range of organizations. And prior to that, I received my PhD in Contemporary Francophone African Expressive Cultures, a mashup degree comprising foreign languages and cultural anthropology. But my interest in how culture informs people's experiences started even earlier than that. Growing up in a biracial immigrant family in the United States of America, with most of my family abroad, I was fortunate enough to be exposed to many different cultures from a very young age. It motivated me to learn 5 new languages, travel to over 50 countries, and eventually make a career out of thinking through how to facilitate meaningful cross-cultural communication in products. So today, I connect with our users around the world to learn about how culture might impact how they're using our products. And this type of research is important to companies like Facebook that develop products for people around the world because it helps us build our understanding of how people's use of products within their own cultural settings might differ from place to place, and in turn helps companies like Facebook build more culturally relevant experiences for all of its users. But what happens when you're building a product that is intentionally taking people out of their cultural setting? How might you ensure that your product is accessible when it's introducing people from different parts of the world into an entirely new culture that you're creating through products? Today, I'd like to talk to you about the value of conducting cross-cultural research when designing simulated environment technologies. What exactly do I mean by cross-cultural research? I mean research on communication processes and challenges that arise wherein one culture encounters another. And what do I mean by simulated environment technologies? I mean innovative, interactive technologies that through auditory and visual sensory feedback take people outside of their sense of reality and bring them into an entirely new one created within your simulated environment. So from live simulation video games of times past to live video broadcasting, which connects people from one part of the world to people from another part of the world in real time, to virtual or augmented reality. There's no question that cross-cultural research helps us build our understanding of how people from different parts of the world engage with products that support simulated environments. However, today I want to talk about the value of cross-cultural research to designing the cultures within simulated environments themselves, and how it can uncover integral learnings around self-presentation and communication norms, and even the types of movement that might be supported within these spaces that you're developing. Cross-cultural exchanges regularly happen in simulated environments. So with the right headset, a teen from Itabora, Brazil, who's never left their hometown, can connect with a teen from Pamplona, Spain, as they navigate their way through a virtual world. And the fact that simulated environments can facilitate these exchanges is extraordinary. However, it also presents a unique design challenge. The challenge of designing an interactive space wherein people from various cultures can come together, communicate, and feel equally welcomed and seen. As psychologist and communication theorist Paul Watzlawick once said, everybody believes their reality is the real reality. Whether consciously or subconsciously, the products we design are informed by our own realities. And this makes sense because whether we're aiming to or not, we are often starting from what it is that we know. Yet challenges arise when people from cultures other than our own enter simulated environments that we create, but with different understandings of what that real reality is. The reality fostered in the simulated environments we create, though very real to us, can feel unfamiliar or even inaccessible to others. And why is that? Well, communicating across cultures can be challenging. Certain barriers can limit your understanding of people from other cultures. And the most apparent barrier is verbal communication. When you talk with a person whose primary language is different from your own, the meaning of what you're saying can easily get lost. Certain words that might even look identical in two languages can hold completely different meanings, like false cognates. Nonverbal communication can also limit your understanding of people from other cultures. So one example of this is eye contact. Not holding eye contact while speaking to another person is considered rude in some cultures, whereas the exact opposite is not necessarily true in others. Paralanguage, or things like your pace or intonation of speech, can also get lost in translation. Silences in conversation is a good example of this. Whereas silences might be considered awkward in some cultures, they might be perfectly acceptable in others. And even proxemics, or the physical distance that you feel comfortable allowing between yourself and another person when you're communicating with them, can be very different for you as it is for someone else who's coming from a culture other than your own. So when you consider all of these things, it's clear how easily communication lines can break down offline, let alone in simulated environments. So how might we make products supporting simulated environments feel accessible to people from various cultures? Today, I'll share a few research techniques you can use to investigate communication norms across cultures and in turn, make the design of simulated environments more inclusive. So first, comparative analyses to understand self-presentation norms. Second, word-picture associations to identify perceptions of audience. And third, contextual inquiry to understand norms of movement within physical spaces. A first way that you can gain a deeper understanding of communication norms of participants from cultures other than your own is by conducting comparative analyses of highly localized products. Studying how participants self-present in competitive apps that are highly localized is helpful for understanding how they might expect to self-present within simulated environments that your product supports. Why is this? As social psychologist Geert Hofstede has shown, culture often shapes the way a person thinks of himself or herself relative to an audience. The impact of culture on notions of self is evident when we look at one of Hofstede's 5 major dimensions of culture, individualism. Individualism is how members of a society define their relationship to others. People from what Hofstede calls individualistic cultures, which value competition and personal achievement, self-present in ways that reflect a preference for self-reliance. So they might present themselves as they are as a whole, with minimal concern for how specific individuals might perceive different parts of themselves that make up that whole. People from collectivistic cultures tend to self-present in a different way. Since they see themselves as interdependent with each other and give priority to group harmony over individual success, they might take care to present themselves in different ways to different subgroups making up their audience. And of course, when I'm speaking here of cultures along this individualistic versus collectivistic spectrum, it's only really to highlight at a generalized level how different cultures might think about the self relative to others in different ways. In other words, people from individualistic cultures might very well self-present in ways that are similar to those from collectivistic cultures. That being said, these categorizations are still instructive for thinking through how people's self-presentation norms are often shaped to some degree by culture, and how people's expectations of how they can self-present in simulated environments might in turn also be influenced by culture and also vary from culture to culture. And you can learn a lot about people's self-presentation norms by observing how they present in environments that are closely aligned with their culture. It's for this reason that comparative analyses of highly localized apps that are likely to have a more intimate knowledge of cultural norms within a given region are a great starting point to learn more about users' self-presentation norms in a particular region. So how exactly do you do this? First, you're going to investigate popular, highly localized products within a given culture wherein users must present themselves to others, be it through visual or textual means. And second, you're going to invite participants from that given culture who use these products in for one-on-one interviews and to observe their engagement with these products. And this is something that you could do in person, or should you have access to these localized apps from your own locale, remotely, by asking participants to complete a series of tasks or recording what they're doing through unmoderated screen capture. And then you're going to take some notes. You'll be jotting down interesting things that you might be noticing and how participants are presenting themselves to others. Lastly, you repeat steps 2 and 3 with other highly localized products to note any interesting trends in how participants are self-presenting across all of these apps. At Facebook, our mission is to give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. To ensure that we are working towards our mission, it's important for us to understand not only how people are using our tools to do this, but also how people who aren't using our tools are building community and connecting to each other. And that is exactly what motivated my team and I to study live video broadcasting in Japan, a region wherein live video broadcasting was very popular at the time, but adoption of our live video broadcasting tool was quite limited. Self-presentation is central to the live video broadcasting experience. So the very first thing we did in our research sessions in Japan was identify popular, highly localized apps wherein people present themselves through visual or verbal means to others in real time. And at the beginning of each of these sessions, we asked participants to walk us through how they use each of these competitor apps. And we noted interesting trends in how they were self-presenting to others in these simulated live environments. One really interesting thing that we learned through this exercise, first, almost all of our participants presented themselves on these apps through not one account, but rather several different accounts, sometimes up to 5 or 6. And second, none of these accounts were in participants' actual names. Rather, each one had a name that represented a different part of their personality. For instance, a hobby like baking or animation. According to our participants, managing multiple separate accounts was preferable because it enabled them to more accurately present themselves in different ways to different people from different parts of their lives. They could share information related to their interest in animation through their animation handle, and information relevant to their family through the handle that they shared exclusively with their family members. And through this comparative analysis, our product team was able to better understand why people from this particular region were not adopting our live video broadcasting tool. Our live product simulated environment did not feel accessible to these participants because it required them to present to others under a single handle that was also linked to their actual name. And if they used just one username, they could not fully express to the many aspects of their authentic selves. Comparative analysis exercises like these can widen your team's perspective on self-presentation norms across cultures. It can provide insight into questions like, how much of a person's true identity and true self do they need to reveal in this environment? And does a person develop a single visual representation of themselves, or do they have the option to switch between several options? And with these learnings on how people from regions other than your own already self-present in comparable simulated environments, you can optimize your design of your simulated environment and in turn make your product feel more accessible. A second way in which you might gain a deeper understanding of communication norms of people from different cultures is through word-picture associations. How people relate to other individuals of differing degrees of closeness varies from not just person to person, but also to some degree from culture to culture. So whereas people from certain cultures might feel just as comfortable in front of acquaintances as close family members, individuals from other cultures might routinely present in a certain way in front of their elders versus people their own age. And word picture associations are useful because they can help identify perceptions that people hold of different members of a potential audience. How exactly does this work? First, you're going to write out different personal relations on blank pieces of paper or cards, making sure to include people of varying degrees of closeness. So a parent, a sibling, a friend, all the way down to a complete stranger. And then you'll show participants these cards and ask them to talk you through how they associate with these different relations in a given scenario. Then you'll cluster your cards to note prominent trends in perceptions of audience, who they do versus don't typically engage with for that given scenario. I use this exercise when conducting research on hanging out in the United States of America. The purpose of the study was to learn more about audience concerns with hanging out offline versus online to inform our strategy for media products that were supporting hanging out use cases. And up until now, when I've been speaking about the value of cross-cultural research, it might sound like I'm speaking under the assumption that there are single cultures. But of course, we know that there's no single monolithic culture. Really, various subcultures make up the unique blueprint of each culture that we might identify or associate with a particular region. Intercultural understanding, or the understanding of distinctions within a given culture, is just as important for us to understand for effective product development. So to dig into this question, I used word picture associations to dig into how participants in regions across the United States typically hang out offline versus online. And in each session, I asked participants to tell me about their ideal in-person hangout scenario. Next, I presented them with a stack of cards, each with a picture and the name of a different person that they might or might not know. So parents, siblings, schoolmates, acquaintances, friends, strangers. And then I asked them to order the cards to show who they felt most to least comfortable hanging out with and to tell me why. And I repeated this exercise several times as I changed the terms of the hangout scenario from an in-person offline hangout, first with no technology present, then with people within that space interacting on their own individual devices, then with those individuals gathered around a single device, all the way to remote online hangouts, first entirely text-based, then through video chat, and finally, hangouts in VR spaces. And as expected, the hangout scenarios changed, so did participants' concerns of who they were hanging out with. So for instance, whereas most considered it completely acceptable to hang out with their family members offline and in person, some of them were rather uncomfortable with the idea of hanging out with those same family members in online VR spaces. And this exercise also unveiled interesting differences in audience concerns across subcultures. So for our team participants, the concept of hanging out held many different meanings. And this made it hard for them to even commit in a hypothetical scenario to hanging out with certain personal relations. there were friendly hangouts, but there also were quote unquote hangouts, which they described as more romantic encounters that they might equate with something like chilling, talking, spending a minute, or vibing. And whereas they were cool with hanging out with friends and acquaintances if they were engaging in a virtual friend hangout, they only wanted to hang out with friends or complete strangers when it came to virtual quote unquote hangouts. Acquaintances like classmates were completely off the table in those quote unquote hangout situations because they were people they identified as being familiar but not entirely trustworthy, and people who might know just enough to spread rumors and stir trouble. And interestingly, when they were referring to these acquaintances, they were speaking of them and not complete strangers as the true stranger danger. So this discovery highlighted a really interesting point. The people's understanding of what their audience might look like can vary across different cultures and subcultures, and how language plays a big part in establishing the understanding of audience and other individuals within a given simulated environment space. All of these learnings helped our team widen its perspective on the range of audience concerns that users across subcultures held about Hangouts. With these learnings, we were able to check our assumptions that people would be more likely to hang out with individuals that they knew more in most situations, and further refine the audience controls of our products that were supporting Hangout use cases. Word picture associations can expand your thinking on how people across different cultures might communicate with different audience members within simulated environments. It can help you get answers to questions like, how clearly does your product name establish expectations of who will be in this space? And how much control do people within your simulated environment have over who can and can't interact with them, be it directly or indirectly? And how might you help a person feel comfortable communicating freely with others if they hold concerns about expressing themselves before less clearly defined audiences? A third way in which you can learn more about communication norms of people from cultures other than your own is through contextual inquiry. Also known as fly on a wall, contextual inquiry is where you observe participants' daily lives by experiencing it firsthand. And this exercise is a lightweight way to gain direct insight on participants' understanding of and movement within physical spaces, something that is quite integral to understand when you're creating new simulated environments. How does it work? It's pretty straightforward. You would ask a couple participants if they're okay with you joining them for the day and observing them as they go about their day. I use contextual inquiry to gain a better understanding of how our users in Morocco were viewing live video broadcasts within their home settings. One thing that our team was interested in learning more about was the impact of the physical placement of first screens, like televisions, on people's engagement with live video broadcasts on second screens, like their mobile devices. So in addition to interviewing participants about their live video viewing habits, we also spent some time conducting contextual inquiry with them in their homes in Casablanca. And one really interesting thing that we learned, how the physical arrangement of participants' homes influenced their engagement with live video broadcasts on second screens. Our team initially thought that participants might gather with others in one shared space around one show on television when connecting to live video broadcasts on their second screen. Yet, similar to our assumption, which was very much informed by a specific understanding of what a home setup might look like, each of our participants' homes had 2, and in some instances, even 3 spaces that we might identify as quote unquote living room spaces. And many participants had not one television, but multiple televisions, one in each of these spaces. The fact that participants could move between these entirely separate living room spaces meant that they were not always sharing in the same first screen experience as others. One family member might be watching the news alongside of live videos on their phone, while another might be watching a film alongside of live videos on their phone from a different room. And in turn, these family members might actually be watching the same live video, thereby making their second screen kind of like a first one. And these findings made us check our assumption about second screen experiences existing alongside of one shared first screen experiences, an assumption that was informed by a more US-centric understanding of home design that had, up until that point, been guiding our design strategy for experiences with live as a second screen. If you aren't able to conduct contextual inquiry with participants in their own cultural setting, you can still gain signal on participants' concepts of physical space through use of cognitive maps. Cognitive mapping is when you ask participants to chart out an existing or virtual space and to share and talk you through how it is that they would go about navigating that space. Here's how you would do it. So ahead of meeting with them, you would give participants a task that prompts them to actually navigate through a given physical space. And you might even ask them to take pictures as they are doing this. Then you would connect with your participants through remote VC. and ask them to draw out a blueprint of the physical space that they had recently navigated through. And then you would follow up to get a better understanding of why it is they depicted that space in the way that they chose to. Investigating how people navigate within physical spaces across cultures is particularly relevant to the design of simulated environments because people hold certain expectations of how it is that they can move through given spaces. So how might someone coming from a culture wherein large amounts of personal space are the norm feel if they're then placed in an environment where they must navigate through space with people being able to get really close up to them?